No. So, during Advent this year, which is this season that leads up to Christmas, we've been reflecting on the fact that Jesus came as a baby. Now, we always reflect on the idea that God came to earth during Advent because that's the real celebration of Christmas. It's not, oh, cool, a baby was born in a barn. That's not something to celebrate. That's actually kind of depressing, like that there wasn't room for this baby. We actually celebrate the fact that this baby was somehow mysteriously God come to earth. And so that we always reflect on that at Christmas. But this year in particular, we've been thinking about the fact that it was in the form of a baby that he came. And what does that tell us about the nature of God and who he is and how he works? And also, we've also been reflecting on the idea of what does that tell us about human beings and the nature of human existence? Because if God entered into our existence, our normal existence as human beings, the implication is that somehow it's not all that bad. Now, most of us today, I don't think, struggle with that. But over the years, there have been a lot of religious people who have come along and taught that our human existence, our physical existence in these bodies that we have, is somehow inherently bad or evil, and that we're really on this earth just waiting till we can go to what's commonly known as the good place. Oh, come on. More of you have watched that show than 3. So the point is that over the years, religious people have been tempted to believe that this earth, this existence is somehow evil or bad, and we're just waiting to go home. And the truth is that what the scriptures teach and what it teaches us that God came into our existence is that it's not bad, that it's actually a good thing, that this life is not inherently evil, and that God somehow, by coming to our world and becoming a part of human existence, has elevated us, elevated human existence to this incredible sacred point. And so those are the things we've kind of been thinking about. And last week we talked about how Jesus was an example of humility. How the way that he came, he really couldn't have come any more humbly if he had tried to. Born into this poor family, born in a barn, born into this helpless infant's body. And so Jesus is held up as this standard of humility, that we should all look to our example and try to become more and more like him. And we used a passage out of Philippians to look at how not just the baby Jesus, but the adult Jesus was humble. And I want to revisit that and go a different direction with it this morning. So Philippians 2, 5-8, this is Paul writing to an early church and pointing to Jesus as the example. He says, in your relationships with one another, have the same mindset or attitude as Christ Jesus, who being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage or something to be grabbed onto or held onto tightly. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness and being found in appearance as a man. He humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. So last week we focused on this idea that he humbled himself. But this week I want to focus on the little phrase in here where it says, he made himself nothing. So if you look up the Greek word for made himself nothing, it's just one word, it's kenao, or a related word is kenosis. And sometimes, well, just as a little aside here, when I was in university, my Christian university band name was Kenosis. So that's unrelated to the sermon. But what kenosis or kanao means is to empty or to make empty or to make void or to make powerless something. So if you take a jug of water and you pour it all out on the ground, not only do you get a wet floor, but you have kanaoed it. You have caused it to be empty. And so the word here, it says that somehow in coming to earth, Jesus emptied himself of something. Now, over the years, theologians have debated what this means, how much, to what extent, what was it that Jesus emptied himself or made himself nothing. And they have agreed basically, okay, he didn't unbecome God, that he was still somehow in essence God, But in some mysterious way, he set aside some of his God attributes in order to become human. He emptied himself of some of the things that he enjoyed as God. And there's lots of great theological discussions around that. But I think it's something that we shouldn't just leave to the theologians, but we should think about ourselves. And so I want to do a little brainstorming right now about what kind of things God enjoys as God that he might have had to give up in becoming a human being. So some thoughts on that. What kind of things make God God that he limited or set aside for a time to come to earth? Thoughts? Omnipresence, the fact that we believe God is present everywhere, but when he became a human being, he was confined to one little spot. What else? The need for rest. Yeah, God doesn't need to sleep at night. He doesn't get tired. In fact, there's a passage in Isaiah that says he doesn't get tired or something. Yeah. Trust me, I have it memorized, but I don't want you guys to feel bad. The need for food. Yes, God does it. He says that in, I'm sure, Isaiah as well. I don't need to eat your sacrifices. What else? What other kind of things would God have had to put aside to become a human being? Being recognized as God. Like, so the sort of glory or majesty or however you want to, whatever word you want to use for that, kind of humbled himself in many ways. I guess that's what we just read. Being only metaphysical? Being only metaphysical or kind of spiritual, like, yeah, he becomes a physical body instead of, he doesn't get to fly anymore, right? I assume that God can fly when he's not in a human body. And he probably could even in a human body. So what else? What's that? Immortality. Yeah. There's a certain vulnerability which we actually see played out in Jesus' life, not just that God somehow could lose his life in this crazy, mysterious, ridiculous way, but that he did. So, what else? How about the power to just do what you want whenever you want it, right? Like, we do see Jesus doing miracles, and so in those miracles, he kind of expresses this godness, but he doesn't just do whatever he wants all the time. And I'm pretty sure that's a big difference from being God on a metaphysical level. What else? Anything else?
Obeyed his mother.
Age. What's that?
Obeyed his mother.
He obeyed his mother. We read a passage about that a couple weeks ago. That would be different for God, I'm guessing, to even have a mother. And that's one of the things that like, Catholics make a big deal about that in Orthodox Christians, because what an incredible, crazy idea that God had a mom. What else? You understand, though, that this is something mysterious and deep here, right? That the fact that God somehow limited himself, subjected himself to the same kind of limitations that we have as human beings. Like, we often think about God becoming a baby, but we don't always think about what he unbecame, how he gave up something to come here. I want to talk this morning about limitations. That God, when he became a baby, subjected himself to the same kind of limitations that you and I face. And I want to talk about what that has to say, not only about God, but also about mostly our human existence. So just like us, Jesus didn't have unlimited money or time or energy or abilities, at least not in actual experience. Like I say, he did seem to have this ability to bend the rules sometimes. But most of the time, he operated within normal human rules. In becoming human, he gave up his infiniteness to become finite somehow. And I think that one of the things that we can learn about God through this is his love, is his willingness to give something up for us. Because the reason that he came wasn't just for his own pleasure, just to have a good time or curiosity, see what this human thing's all about. He came to save us and to rescue us. And that was the point from the beginning when the angels showed up to Mary and said he's going to save his people from their sins. That's why you call him Jesus, which means Savior. So he came on a mission, and he was willing to give something up for it. In fact, he was willing to give a lot up for it. The scriptures say that he made himself, though he was rich, he made himself poor for our sakes so that we could become rich. In this symbolic way, he gave up. And I think that's really helpful to understand about God, because it helps us see that God's not always out for just his own good, that he's willing to give something up for our sake and for our good. And sometimes God will call us to give something up for him and for the mission that he's called us on. And it's important to remember that God's not asking us to do something that he wasn't willing to do. And so we can learn about God from the fact that he limited himself, but from the fact that he gave so much up to come to earth, that God is loving and that he acts in a way that's generous and gracious. But I think it's really important then to look at the other side. What does it teach us about us? What does it tell us about our existence and the fact that we live in this limited state where none of us is able to do everything we want, and none of us is able to become all that we want? We're all limited to some extent. And that's how Jesus existed too. And so I want to just think through 4 different areas that we face limitations and how we can learn to accept those limitations and even look at them as a gift because of the fact that Jesus himself took them on as well. I'll start in our wallets, talk about financial limitations. So this is one of the ones that we seem to face on a daily basis. Financial limitations, it's the limitation that sometimes can make us grumpiest. It's the limitation that can cause friction in our marriages, the fact that we don't have unlimited financial resources. And if you do, then just don't listen to this first part, because we'll get to your limitations later. But here's the thing. Money for us represents power. It represents the ability to live and to live well. It represents our security. It represents having our needs met. Sometimes it can represent luxury. And as God doesn't need money to do any of those things, right? God can just get those things directly, whether he wants a day at the spa or to pay his mortgage in heaven. He doesn't have to use money to do that, right? God has no need of money. But when he became a human being, Jesus suddenly needed money. Now, just like most of us, he starts off living off his parents' money, their ability to provide for his needs through their own work, through their own income. But as he grows, he spent at least 15 years working a blue-collar job as a technon or a carpenter or builder. We're not often we think of Jesus working in a carpenter's shop. I've read some commentaries that basically say it's a whole lot more likely that he traveled to a nearby city that was being rebuilt and worked as a house builder than, sitting there in the carpenter's shop. We don't really know. What we do know is that that's what he was known as a carpenter. He made his own income with his own 2 hands for many years. And he was born not into a rich, royal family or anything like that, but into just a struggling, poor, blue-collar family, working every day, trying to make a living, trying to put a roof over their head. When he traveled around for 3 years in his ministry, he relied on the generosity and donations of other people to live. And so Jesus had these financial limitations. He needed money in order to live, in order to survive. And he took those financial limitations, like the passage I just talked about said, he took those on voluntarily. Now, that's not something we're into, is it? To voluntarily limit ourselves financially. We're kind of taught to get as much as you can and spend as much as you can. But within that sort of system, I think all of us have times when we feel limited on this financial end. Now, this can look a lot of different ways. So for some of us, to feel limited, to feel our financial limitations means that we struggle to pay the bills. We struggle to put a roof over our head. We struggle to put food on the table. And so money can become a big limiting factor if you struggle to have enough of it to even meet your own needs. But for some people, they don't struggle that way. But maybe they struggle with not being able to buy a vehicle, or not being able to repair their vehicle, or not being able to pay for dental work, or not being able to buy their own house and stuck in renting and they don't want to, but they just don't have money to kind of take that next step. Or some people may have those kind of needs met, but they don't have money, they feel like, to go on a good family vacation. Or maybe they don't have money to save for retirement the way they would like to, or to eat out as often as they want, or to pay for their kids' education in the way they want. Or maybe some people have money to do that, but they don't have money to buy everything they want, the toys, or they don't have money to maybe be as generous as they want, to give as much away as they want. The point that I'm trying to make is that no matter what level of income or savings you get to, I'm pretty sure you feel like you could use a little bit more. Now, I don't mean to say that we're all ungrateful all the time. I think sometimes we're content and grateful, but I think we always feel a bit of limitation by the income we get. I remember reading an article a few years ago that said $5 million in the bank was the amount that made people the happiest. More than that, you would, I don't know, more stress came. Less than that, you weren't all that secure. 5 million gave enough to just live off the income and have a pretty decent income on it. Now, that was a few years ago. It's probably up to 6 million now. But I have a feeling that even when you had that $5 or $6 million, you would still feel limited by your finances. Because no matter how much your income grows, there's still more that you could get, right? There's still more that you could do. So we all face financial limitations unless you're like a multi-billionaire or something like that, in which case, like I say, this part isn't for you. But it's always been this way that we feel these financial limitations. Ecclesiastes 5:10 says this: whoever loves money never has enough. Whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with their income. This, too, is meaningless. And, of course, the book of Ecclesiastes, if you read through it, has a lot of things that are meaningless. But one of the things he says is, I'm really rich now, and I find it meaningless. It doesn't scratch the itch. It doesn't meet my needs. And I think that's really important for us to understand when it comes to finances. Wherever you're limited, whether you're struggling to pay the bills or whether you're struggling to get all that you want or somewhere in the middle, it is always a limitation. And if we look to it to solve our problems or to make us happy or to bring us the meaning in the life that we need, there's never going to be enough. And we're always going to keep bumping up against that limit. So what's the solution? The solution is to be content with what you have, to be content within the financial limits that God has given you. To say, not to say, oh, I'm not going to try for a better job or try to make a better income. I think that's fine. But whatever you're at now, whatever you have now, to say these are the limits that life, that God has given me, and I'm going to be content right here. And one of the best ways that we can express our contentment and our acceptance of the financial limits that God has given us, and a little disclosure here, I'm not great at this, it's living within your means. Now, back 100 years ago, 200 years ago, living within your means was fairly natural because you didn't have more than you had. But nowadays, living within your means takes discipline because anytime you want something that you can't afford, you can always swipe the card. Well, not always. Eventually it runs out. You can always take out that home equity line. You can always get on the payment plan. And so we live in a society that we're encouraged to live above our means, to spend more than we take in. And I think one way to say, I accept my limitations, one way to say, I accept that I live within a particular financial limitation is simply to live within it and not always push against it. And like I say, that's an area of struggle for me. If I don't tell you that, April will. So I think what we say when we swipe that card and when we use debt as a means of getting what we want all the time, it's a way of saying that I refuse to accept the limitations in my life. I refuse to accept these financial limitations, and I will push against them by any means necessary. Whereas living within our means and being content with what we have is a way of saying, I accept where I am. I accept reality, and I accept the fact that my finances are limited, and even if I had a little bit more, they'd still be limited. So that's the first limitation we need to deal with, that Jesus had to deal with too. The second is chronological. The fact that we don't have enough hours in the day or enough days in the week. And I think we relate to time in the same way that we relate to money. We refuse to accept the fact that our time is limited. And we have a tendency to overspend on our time as well, to not live within our means as far as time goes. And for every opportunity and every good thing that comes our way, we say, yes, I can do that, and yes, I can do that. Every kid's activity, yes, I can do that, yes, I can do that. But have you ever noticed that the more good things you put into your life, it doesn't necessarily equal a better life? Has anybody noticed that? Has anybody noticed that at Christmas time? Has anybody this very week said, oh, I just wish I had more time? Well, it's just like money. If you're not satisfied with those 24 hours and God were to give you 25 hours in a day, guess what? You'd just fill them up and you'd be wishing for 26. And there's something very important about recognizing the fact that our time is limited, both in terms of the hours in the day and the days in the week and the span of our life. And accepting that fact. Accepting the fact that we will never have time to do everything we want to do. And so a good life is shaped not by choosing everything good, but by choosing a few things that are best. Now think about God's existence as God. It says in the scriptures that a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years are like a day. And we don't know exactly how God relates to time, whether he's in time or whether he's outside of time, but we do understand that God relates to time differently than what we would. But when Jesus becomes human, he puts himself within this thing that we call time, and he limits himself to being able to only do what 24 hours a day and what 7 days a week can get done. And even more than that, he only gives himself 33 years to accomplish his mission. And yet he did. He changed the planet forever in those 33 years. Now, I'm sure that sometimes God, who is used to dealing with time in this infinite way, it must have felt strange to become human and only have a limited amount of time. And if I were God, I probably would have chosen for Jesus to die at like 65 or so. Because if you think about it, if Jesus had had more time, he could have reached more people. If he had more time, he could have healed more people. If he had more time, he could have traveled the world and maybe even gone to some of the big city centers of his day, like Rome or Athens, and really made such a bigger impact. And so it seems in my mind that it would have been good for God to give him a little more time to accomplish a little bit more. But Jesus didn't seem worried about that. He didn't seem worried that he needed to heal every person. He didn't seem worried that he needed to reach everyone that was alive in his day. He knew that he had a particular mission to do, and that was to give his life. And he was faithful to God in that. And he was faithful to the other things God called him along the way. And the fact that he didn't have time to do a lot more didn't seem to worry him. He was able to trust that God would use other people to do those things. And I think that that is an example for us as well, that all of us have this time limitation. All of us don't have the amount of time that would be needed to do everything we've ever dreamed of, to accomplish everything that we want to accomplish. That goes for a day. How many of you have ever finished your to-do list? Not me. I always have more stuff. I just have to be satisfied at the end of the day that I've done, enough. And it also goes for a lifetime. That your ability to experience this world is limited by the amount of time that you have. And that's normal, and that's part of human existence. I think it goes the same way as for finances, that the solution to this problem of limits is acceptance. It's contentment. It's understanding that this is what God's given us and being okay with that and not trying to overspend. By the way, that's if there's a tension in our marriage, I'm always trying to spend more money than we have, and April's always trying to spend more time than we have. So we work well together in saying no. Within the scriptures is a weekly discipline that helps remind us that time is not unlimited, and that is Sabbath. Again and again, God says, take a day off every week. Don't do anything. And this reminds you that the world goes on even when you're not accomplishing something. See, we actually learn that we don't have to do everything by intentionally doing nothing. We learn to accept the limits of our time by voluntarily placing limits on our time and saying, you know what, I'm going to discipline myself to really take a day off and just do what I enjoy and not accomplish anything one day a week, and teach myself that my time is limited and I'll never get it all done. And so I need to take time to rest and enjoy life. And when we do that, we learn that the world actually goes on, even when we have a day off, that God can take care of things and he can use other people too. The third limitation we face is physical. It's our body. Okay? There are things about our body that limit us. One of those is geographical, like we talked about with God. Jesus limited himself to one place. That's how we are. And I think if you really think about that, that's a very good thing. Imagine being able to be in two places at once. Imagine how hard it is to manage one schedule. Imagine you had to manage two schedules or three schedules for yourself. I wouldn't be able to do it. So I'm glad that I can only be in one place at a time. But Jesus was born in that kind of a physical body. Like we said, he got hungry, he got thirsty, he got tired, he had to rest. He couldn't stay up all night, all day, all the time. He had physical limitations like we do. When he got hungry, he needed to find food. When he got thirsty, he needed to drink. We see these things in the scriptures. By the way, he was even more limited than us in some ways, in that when he wanted to go somewhere, he didn't hop in his car and drive there. He had to walk. Now, I don't know if you've ever thought about whether Jesus got a cold, had to deliver a sermon with a stuffy nose or a hoarse throat. Did he ever get the flu and have to stay in bed all day? You ever get a stomach bug and have his body kind of go into revolt on him? All these things that are limitations for us as people today, I would imagine Jesus as a human being faced back then too. He was a human being in the way that we are. I don't know if you ever get frustrated with the way your body is or the way it works. Maybe you're not satisfied with your height. I felt that way from time to time. Maybe you don't like the way you look. Maybe you don't like there's certain quirks about the way your body works. Maybe you struggle with some ongoing illness or chronic pain. There are things wrong with our bodies. Nobody has the perfect, fully functioning body. And so we run into these things in very personal ways that our bodies limit us. And sometimes we can grow very discontent and very dissatisfied with the things that we have to face because we're embodied physical people. And that, by the way, is why so many times over the course of the church has tended to looking at bodies as bad or evil somehow because people get frustrated with them and say that must be from the devil. Instead, the scriptures teach that our bodies are a gift from God, even though they're imperfect. So, Jesus took on a body, and we don't have any evidence of the fact that he had anything seriously wrong with him or that he faced major physical ailments or anything like that. But imagine what it would be to go from being the all-powerful, everywhere present God to being stuck in this little human body, especially the body of a baby that's very limited. And so I think that the thing we need to understand when we face problems with our own body or sickness or illness or disabilities or whatever it is, that Jesus understands what it's like. He understands that those limitations can be frustrating. And that one of the reasons he became human is, Hebrews 2 says, so that he can empathize with us in our weakness and in our temptation. And so I just think that we need to understand that God took on those limitations voluntarily. And so when we feel those limitations in our life, we need to be content and to accept ourselves and accept the body that God has given us, because the body that God has given us in many ways is us. It's a part of us. We're not just trapped in it. And so it's a gift from him, even though it has limitations, and even though those limitations are at different points for each of us. The fourth kind of limitation is a bunch of different areas that I want to sort of wrap into the word capacity. Okay, capacity includes things like your energy level, your emotional health or woundedness, your gifts and talents, your intellectual capacity. Each of us has been given by God different things and a limited amount of each of these things. So if you go around the room, each one of us is going to have different energy levels. Okay, some people can work morning to night every day and just grow somehow more and more energized. Some people struggle to put in a 6-hour day and are exhausted at the end. And I don't know if you've ever felt kind of jealous about that, if you're more of a lower energy people. Where does that person get their energy? I always like to think they're on drugs. No, I'm just kidding. Sorry to all the high energy people here. I don't really think that about you. But I know a lot of pastors who work tirelessly for their church and seem to just have more to give and give and give, and they look like workaholics, and sometimes they burn out, but sometimes they keep going. And I think, man, if I just had more energy, I could give more to the church. Or if I didn't have kids at home and my kids were grown, well, then I could give more to the church. All of us face limits when it comes to energy. And most of us always feel like we could use a little more energy, like we get worn out too quickly. I don't know why it is. Sometimes there's biological reasons. Who knows? But the truth is that we don't all have the same energy. It's the same with emotional capacity. One of the things I've observed as a pastor over the years is how past emotional wounds can affect us in the present. Things that our parents did to us, things that other relatives or friends or family members did to us when we were young that were hurtful, that caused wounds, we can carry well into the future. And that's not fair. Not fair that something that we had no choice in limits the way that we can relate to other people today. Many times the things that have happened to us in the past, relational wounds, limit the way that we're able to relate to other people in our present. And that sucks. And I think God helps us in that, and I think he brings healing. But if we're truthful about it, not all of us have the same emotional capacity. Not all of us have the same ability to be emotionally healthy or to be steady. Many of us ride these waves of ups and downs. Many of us struggle because of things in our past, and that's not fair. We don't all have the same emotional capacity, but it's reality. How about gifts and talents? Okay? How about intellectual capacity? We'll throw that in there too. Have you ever met these people that seem to have won life's lottery? And they have it all, right? They're athletic, they're smart, they're musical, they're good with people, they're creative, they're good looking, they're fit. And you're over here trying to tie your shoes without falling over. Does anybody else feel that way? And we like to minimize this in our culture. We like to say, well, they look like they have a lot, but we all have gifts. We all have something to contribute. And in some ways that's true. But let's be honest for a minute. Some people do seem to have more. Some people seem to have been given more in terms of talent and stuff. And we're all equal and we're all valuable. But to minimize the fact that sometimes there are people who have greater capacity than others, I think is just not to live in reality. I think that different people have been given different things. And there's a great story in the Bible that illustrates this. It's a parable by Jesus. He made it up to teach a point, and it's of 3 servants who are given money, bags of gold, by a master. And he says, put it to work. I'm going away. And he goes away, and the first 2 put it to work, and they double the amount of money. They double their money. And when he comes back and he says to each of them, he says, what have you done? He said, here, I doubled your money. Okay, well done. I'm happy. I'm pleased. You're rewarded with even more. Here, I doubled my money. Well done. I'm happy. I'm pleased. I reward you with even more. And then the third guy says, I was afraid. What if I lost it? What if somehow something went wrong? So I buried it in the ground, and so here's your money back. And the master's not happy because he's like, well, I gave that to you to use. I wanted you to do something with it, not just bury it in the ground. And so the master's unhappy in that case. And 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 the master's unhappy in And I love the story because what it teaches us is that whatever capacity we've been given, whatever gifts, talents, emotional energy, all those sorts of things, we're supposed to use them for good and for God. That's part of the point of the passage. But another point in this story is that not everyone was given the same thing. The first guy got 5 bags of gold. The second guy got 2 bags of gold. And the third guy only got 1. But the third guy did not get off easy because he was only given 1. He was still expected to use it, not just bury it in the ground. And I think that Jesus tells the story this way because he could have easily told it with each of them getting 1 or each of them getting 5. I think he tells the story this way to teach us, listen, different people get different things. And I'm not comparing anyone in my judgment of what you're doing with it. I'm just looking at what you've done with what I've given you. And the point is simply that whatever you've been given, whether you're a high-capacity person with lots of energy and emotional health and every gift under the sun, well, that's great. What are you doing with it? And whether you're someone who feels like you're having a hard time tying your shoes without falling over, God says, okay, what are you doing with what I've given you? And we can get all caught up in comparing ourselves and our capacities to other people. God doesn't do that. God understands who you are, where you are, and what capacity he's given you. And he's just saying, what are you doing with it? What are you doing for good and for me in the world? It's not inherently fair. We don't all get the same thing. But God seems a lot less concerned about that than what we're doing with what he has given us. By the way, no one's given unlimited capacity. Even the high capacity people, I'm sure, feel like they bump against a wall sometimes. They wish they could do more. They wish they had skills they don't have. The truth is that even though Jesus had a pretty high capacity, it seems, he still ran into things that he couldn't do. Like I said, he didn't heal everyone. So if Jesus was judged by his ability to heal, he would have been a dismal failure because he didn't heal lots of people. And the people that he did heal ended up getting sick and dying eventually anyway. But that wasn't his mission. That wasn't his call. That wasn't his purpose. His purpose was to give his life. And that's what God judged him by. And I don't know how that works, actually. How does God judge Jesus? I don't know. The point is, he had a mission. And it's the same with us. God doesn't judge us by all the things that we could never do. He judges us by what he's given us that we can do. And his judgment is pretty gracious in that. The Apostle Paul was this early church leader who seemed to have a huge capacity. Seemed to have a huge ability to reach people and to make a difference in the world. And we see that even down into our day, that his influence, his legacy lives on. But he hit the end of his capacity as well. 2 Corinthians 1, 8-9 says this: "We don't want you to be uninformed, brothers and sisters, about the troubles we experienced in the province of Asia. We were under great pressure, far beyond our ability to endure, so that we despaired of life itself. Indeed, we had felt that we had received the sentence of death, but this happened that we might not rely on ourselves, but on God, who raises the dead." Paul has hit the end of his capacity. He's being stretched beyond his ability to endure, beyond his ability to face the situations he's facing. And I'm sure that wasn't pleasant. And I'm sure that it was a pretty miserable experience. But he looks back on it and says, oh, you know why that happened? You know why God brought me to the edge of my limitations? Is so I could learn to rely on him. And that's what I think I want to just sort of close with, is this understanding that our limits, whether they're financial, whether they're time, whether they're physical limitations, whether they're capacity limitations, that those limits are there to teach us one major thing, and that is that we are not God. That only God is unlimited. Only God is infinite. And each of us are finite. And each of us will bump up against those limitations that we have. And we can let them make us frustrated and angry. That we can let them get under our skin. We can spend all of our time wishing that we weren't limited financially, wishing we had more money, wishing we had more time, wishing we had, a body that worked better, wishing that we had better capacity in our life. We can spend all of our time wishing we didn't have limits. Or we can accept those limits and allow us, when we bounce off those walls in our life, to bounce us right back to God. And that's what Paul says, is when I reached the end of my limit, it just taught me to rely more on God. And the truth is, if you want to go back to those 5-bag, 2-bag, 1-bag people, the people in this room who have been given the most capacity and given, the best financial situation and the best of everything, will eventually get to the limits of that. And then they have to learn to trust God and rely on God. But there's a special gift that's given to people who might have only been given 1 bag, who are used to struggling financially, who are used to living in a body that doesn't work right, people who haven't had everything handed to them on a silver platter, who wish they had better skills, who wish they were smarter. And the incredible gift is that in our limitations, we learn to walk closely with God. In our limitations, we learn to trust him more and to rely on him more. And so our limitations are not, like I often think, a curse. They're actually a blessing. They're a gift from God. And so as this Christmas, as you reflect on this little baby, this incredibly miraculous baby, don't just think about God becoming human, but think of what he gave up and think of the way that he took on limitations and how those limitations in our lives aren't just there to cause us struggle and to frustrate us, but to teach us to rely on him. And in the end, when you hit those limitations and you say, I don't have time to do it, I don't have money to do it, you can just let go and rest and trust that God can do things even when we're at our limits. Let's pray. God, I thank you for the gift of limits, and I thank you for the way that you have taught me to be more content, and the way that you've taught me to live within and accept the fact that my money, my time, my body, and my gifts and talents all are limited. I thank you for the way that you've taught me to bounce back to you when I hit those limiting walls. And I pray for each one of us here that you would help us learn to look at the limits you've placed in our lives, not just as obstacles to be overcome, but as gifts to be accepted and as things that can help us grow in our relationship with you. And as we go from this place today, God, would you go with us? Would you allow us not just to reflect deeply and celebrate the love that you showed at Christmas, but allow us to pass that love on to other people. In Jesus' name, amen. Have a great week. Hopefully we'll see you back here tomorrow evening. We'll sing some songs and have a nice